Most people think a single man loses value over time, that he becomes cold, disconnected, or lonely. But the Stoic perspective, and the reality for men who choose growth over distraction, says the opposite. The longer a man is single, the more powerful he becomes, not because he avoids connection, but because he stops depending on it. This isn't about bitterness. It's about refinement. A man who stays single with purpose isn't wasting time. He's building discipline, clarity, emotional control. He's not chasing validation or constant intimacy. He's investing in silence, solitude, and mastery. And in that space, he learns who he really is without the noise of approval, expectation, or compromise. The longer he walks alone, the stronger his standards become. He doesn't tolerate chaos, neediness, or shallow energy. His attention sharpens. His presence becomes heavier. He speaks less, but when he does, people listen. Not because he's loud, but because his words come from depth, not desperation. So here's the question. Are you alone, or are you becoming something most people aren't willing to face? A man who no longer needs the world to validate him before he moves. Let's unpack why the right kind of solitude doesn't make you weaker. It makes you dangerous, in the best possible way. There comes a point in a man's life where words lose their urgency, where he no longer feels the need to prove, to perform, or to constantly explain himself. This shift doesn't come from applause, it comes from solitude. The longer a man spends single, not distracted, but deliberately alone, the more he begins to understand something most people fear. Real power doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It doesn't fill silence just to feel heard. Real power resides in control, especially over your own mouth. When a man is constantly in relationships, especially the wrong ones, he often talks too much. He negotiates boundaries, defends his masculinity, explains his intentions, overcorrects when misunderstood. But when he chooses time alone, he learns to sit with himself. And from that stillness comes a powerful trait, disciplined expression. He doesn't interrupt, he observes, and when he speaks, it's with clarity, not emotional urgency. That's why a man who's been alone with purpose commands more when he speaks less. People listen, not because of his volume, but because of his presence. He's not desperate to be liked. He's not trying to win approval. He says what's true, not what's safe. And that's the kind of energy that leaves a lasting impression on women, in business, and in life. Silence also builds internal certainty. When no one's validating you daily, you learn to validate yourself. You start trusting your instincts. You no longer overshare because you don't need external opinions to shape your actions. You've tested your thoughts in isolation. And now, every word you speak is backed by quiet experience, not noisy theory. This doesn't mean you become cold or distant. In fact, the man who's forged in solitude often becomes more grounded, more compassionate, and more present. But he's not reactive. He doesn't respond just because someone else is uncomfortable. He lets tension breathe. He lets people reveal themselves, and by doing less, he sees more. Eventually, the people around him realize that when he finally does speak, they need to pay attention, because he's not performing. He's revealing what he already knows, and that kind of man, who's learned to master his own silence, is never mistaken for average. So if you're single and wondering whether this path is making you invisible, think again. You may be speaking less, but when you walk into a room, your presence says everything. Because the longer you've walked with yourself, the fewer words you need to make people feel your weight. The longer a man walks alone, not out of rejection but by conscious choice, the more refined his vision becomes. He no longer says yes just to feel wanted. He no longer entertains surface-level connections just to avoid silence. Over time, extended singleness doesn't weaken his value. It sharpens his standards to the point where compromise becomes unthinkable. At first, solitude feels quiet, maybe even empty. But as the noise fades, what's left is clarity. A man begins to see how much of his past energy was spent negotiating with chaos, lowering his expectations to keep the peace, softening his edge to be understood, or accepting attention that wasn't truly aligned. Now, in silence, he recognizes what he should have walked away from sooner. And because he no longer fears being alone, he also no longer fears letting go. This is what makes his standards unshakable. Not ego, not bitterness, but self-respect. He's built a life that feels good to come home to. His mornings are disciplined. His space is peaceful. His time is structured. So if someone enters his world, they're not there to complete him. They're there to enhance what's already working. Women can sense this. A man with unshakable standards moves differently. He doesn't chase, he doesn't rush. He observes, he asks real questions. And when something doesn't align, he doesn't argue. He walks, not from anger, from certainty. And that certainty is magnetic because it's rare. Most men tolerate too much because they're afraid of going without. But the man who has learned to thrive in singleness doesn't settle. Not because he's hard to please, but because he's already pleased with his own direction. His life is full. His mission is real. His standards are high, not because he expects perfection, but because he knows his peace is too valuable to trade cheaply. The world will try to convince him to be more open, to compromise, to loosen up. But he doesn't need to defend his choices. His results speak for him. And those results, peace, purpose, clarity, are what most men never experience because they were too quick to accept anything over being alone. So if you're walking this path of extended singleness, don't shrink your standards to make others more comfortable. You're not being rigid, you're being rare. And in a world built on noise and need, a man who knows his worth and protects his space becomes impossible to ignore. There's a lie often whispered to single men, especially as they age, that their solitude means something is missing. That time alone equals emotional lack. That without a partner, a man is somehow incomplete. But the Stoic truth is far more powerful. The man who walks alone is not empty, he's evolving. Solitude isn't a void, it's a refining fire. It strips away distraction, validation, and the noise of unnecessary opinions. When a man stops outsourcing his worth to others, he's left with the most important question he'll ever face. Who am I without anyone watching? That answer isn't found in crowds. It's discovered in silence, over time, and through disciplined self-observation. As the single man evolves, he begins to trade entertainment for focus. He wakes with a clearer mind. He walks through his day with more intention. He builds systems, habits, and direction. Not because anyone is pushing him, but because he's finally pushing himself. That's what transformation looks like. Not loud breakthroughs, but quiet consistency. He also becomes more emotionally regulated. Without constant emotional feedback from a relationship, he learns to master his own inner state. He doesn't overreact. He doesn't beg for reassurance. He learns to sit with discomfort and work through it, not run from it. This is the emotional maturity that so many men skip by rushing into partnerships too early. And perhaps most importantly, he stops looking for someone to complete him, because he's already becoming whole. And when he does meet someone, it won't be out of desperation or loneliness. It will be from overflow, from presence, from a place of strength and not scarcity. That kind of man doesn't just love better. He leads better. The outside world may still misread him, call him distant, cold, or overly independent, but what they don't see is the internal evolution. The sharpening of thought, the strengthening of spirit, the steady dune of a man who's no longer shaped by other people's timelines. So if you're walking alone and wondering if you're falling behind, remember, you're not empty. You're becoming full in ways most will never understand. And the version of you being built in solitude, that man will be remembered not for what he chased, but for what he became. To most people, solitude feels like punishment. They fear silence, resist stillness, and run from the mirror that being alone forces them to face. But the Stoic man sees it differently. He doesn't view solitude as exile. He sees it as advantage, because when you embrace being alone, you gain something few others ever access: weaponized clarity. Solitude reveals what distractions hide. When you're not chasing attention, not managing emotions, not filtering your day through someone else's moods, you begin to see patterns, weaknesses, delays, excuses, and with each day alone, your vision sharpens. Not just outward, but inward. You start noticing your own flaws without self-hate, and your strengths without arrogance. That's the root of real growth, unfiltered self-awareness. With no one around to flatter you or question you, you begin to move cleaner. Decisions become faster. Your time becomes sacred. You stop tolerating waste of energy, of conversation, of potential. And that shift, that's where clarity becomes a weapon. Because most men are too distracted to focus, too emotional to act with precision. But you've been training in silence. This clarity bleeds into every area of your life. In your work, you no longer second guess. In your habits, you hold the line. In your relationships, you see through performance and into character. You no longer need to be convinced of who deserves your time. You know. You've seen too much to fall for noise disguised as connection. And women, they feel it too. A man who has been through solitude with discipline carries a different frequency. He doesn't overtalk. He doesn't chase. He doesn't need to be seen, but somehow people notice him anyway. Because his energy doesn't beg, it commands. And that command doesn't come from ego. It comes from clarity earned in quiet. Isolation is when a man feels lost and detached. Solitude, weaponized properly, is when a man becomes razor-focused and deeply aligned. The world doesn't teach this. It rewards distraction. But the Stoic man doesn't need noise to feel alive. He needs mission. And mission is only found when the world goes quiet long enough for you to hear your own standard rise. So ask yourself, is your time alone draining you or defining you? Because when solitude is embraced with purpose, it stops being empty. It becomes lethal clarity, and that clarity makes you unstoppable. At first, it feels like loss. The quiet mornings, the empty weekends, no one to text goodnight. For many men, time alone feels like a void they need to fill fast. But the Stoic man doesn't rush to escape it. He doesn't fear loneliness. He lets it shape him. Because what begins as loneliness over time becomes power. The transition is subtle. In the beginning, you may miss the validation, the intimacy, the sense of being wanted. But as the days go on, you stop craving stimulation and start building stability. You begin replacing what you lost with what you needed all along: direction, discipline, structure, silence. And in that silence, your masculine edge starts to return. Without distraction, your habits sharpen. You train more. You sleep deeper. You execute better. Your focus intensifies, not because someone is watching, but because you are. And that self-witnessing, that's where masculine self-respect is forged. No applause, no one checking in, just you showing up anyway. Eventually, you stop seeking energy from outside and begin generating it from within. That shift changes how you walk into a room. You speak less, but with more weight. You don't need attention, you choose where to give it. And that restraint, that calm presence is what makes people respect you without fully understanding why. Emotionally, the man who's embraced solitude becomes harder to shake. He's no longer reactive. He doesn't beg for closeness or fear distance. He's not hardened, but he's anchored. He knows the difference between loneliness and unfiltered self-mastery. That's a level few ever reach because they try to fill the void instead of growing through it. Women sense this. They feel the man who no longer texts out of boredom or loneliness. The man who doesn't need to impress. The man who doesn't need them to feel whole. That kind of presence is rare and incredibly magnetic. It doesn't beg to be chosen. It simply stands and waits to see who's truly worthy of stepping into the frame. So if you're in a season of being alone, don't rush to end it. Sit with it, study it, sharpen in it. Because what once felt like emptiness may become the most powerful version of you the world has yet to see. And when you re-enter that world, you won't be looking for someone to complete you. You'll be walking in already full. When a man is single, most people assume he's waiting for love, waiting to be chosen, waiting for the right time to start living fully. But the Stoic man doesn't wait, he trains. He doesn't sit still hoping for someone to complete his story. He uses that silence, that freedom, that space to sharpen his body, his mind, and his mission. And while the world overlooks him now, it won't stay that way forever. Because when a man trains in silence, the world notices him when it matters. This kind of man doesn't announce his process. He doesn't post every win or explain every change. His transformation is quiet, consistent, and disciplined. He's not trying to prove anything. He's focused on building something. And because no one is distracting him with inconsistent emotions or unearned attention, he moves faster, thinks clearer, and acts with deeper precision. He's stacking skills. Reading when others scroll, lifting when others sleep. Saying no when most men say yes to validation. His edge isn't being dulled by the wrong woman, the wrong circle, or the wrong habits. His solitude is his sanctuary. His hunger is internal. He's not lonely. He's becoming dangerous. And when that man finally steps back into the world, he moves differently. He walks with authority. His presence hits harder. He doesn't have to chase attention. It turns toward him. Why? Because people can feel when a man knows himself, leads himself, and respects himself enough to have waited until he was ready, not just available. Women begin to sense it too. He doesn't speak to impress. He listens more than he talks. And when he chooses to engage, there's weight behind his words because they're backed by discipline, not need. She realizes quickly, he didn't spend his single years chasing pleasure. He was building presence. That's not just attractive, it's unforgettable. Most men rush into relationships because they fear irrelevance. But the man who trains in silence isn't worried about being seen. He's focused on being undeniable. And once he arrives, people will ask, where did he come from? But the truth is, he was always there, just too focused to waste time being noticed. So if you're single now, don't just pass time, build through it. Because every rep, every quiet morning, every refined standard is shaping you into the man the world isn't ready for yet. And when they finally see you, it'll be too late to catch up. There's a phase in a man's life when no one is watching, no compliments, no validation, no one texting, calling, or checking in. It feels like silence, but for the Stoic man, that silence is exactly where he sharpens. While others chase attention, he disappears. Not out of weakness, but out of deliberate self-construction. And when he re-emerges, he's not just different, he's undeniable. This man isn't aimless during his singleness. He isn't numbing himself with distractions or wasting hours on things that don't move him forward. He's studying, lifting, building, executing. He's cutting fat, from his body, from his habits, from his life. Every part of him is becoming leaner, sharper, more aligned with his mission. The longer he stays silent, the more dangerous he becomes. Most people won't see it happening, and that's the point. Real transformation happens in the dark, when there's no applause, no audience, no reward but self-respect. The man who trains in silence doesn't do it to impress others. He does it because he knows what it feels like to be undisciplined, distracted, weak, and he refuses to return to that version of himself. When he finally steps back into public view, he doesn't need to say anything. His body speaks, his tone speaks, his posture speaks, the room shifts, people listen. Not because he's trying to be seen, but because he's the only one who did the work when no one else would. That energy is unmissable. Women notice too. Not just his looks or discipline, but his emotional containment. He doesn't overextend, he doesn't overexplain, he doesn't need her attention, but if she earns his, it means something. He didn't stay single waiting for connection. He stayed single until his standards were so refined that only real alignment would qualify. Other men might mock his solitude. "Where's your girl? Why so serious?" But when the results start to show, when his peace is protected, his path is clear, and his presence carries gravity, those same men go silent. Because they realize they were loud while he was building. So if you're single now, good, stay there. Not to hide, but to hone. Let others spend their energy chasing short-term highs. You stay sharp in the dark, so when your moment comes, you don't just show up, you dominate. You've now seen what most men never understand about solitude. It's not a sentence, it's a sharpening. The longer you walk alone with discipline, the more precise you become. The world tells you to hurry, to find someone, to fill the silence. But the Stoic man doesn't fear the silence. He uses it. He builds in it. He transforms through it, because he knows that when you train in private, you never need to beg for recognition. You become the man who speaks less but is remembered more. Every moment you spend refining your standards, mastering your habits, and choosing peace over noise adds weight to your presence. And one day the world will notice, not because you chased attention, but because your discipline made you unignorable. You don't need to explain your time alone. Your results will speak for themselves. Your solitude wasn't loneliness, it was preparation. And while most were wasting time proving themselves, you were becoming someone who doesn't have to. So the real question is, what are you doing with your silence? Are you wasting it on comfort or turning it into something powerful? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you're walking this path with quiet fire, subscribe to Masculine Stoic Mind. Because the longer you stay focused, the more dangerous you become. And when the world finally sees you, you won't need to say a word.